Shemar Stewart has taken his dispute over language in his rookie deal to the next level, leaving before the final day of Bengals minicamp. Let's break it down.
You are Locked On Bengals, your daily Cincinnati Bengals podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What up, Bengals fans, and welcome to another episode of the Locked On Bengals podcast on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm Jake Liscow. He's James Rapien, and we've been covering the Cincinnati Bengals here on Locked On Bengals for, well, nearly a decade. I can't count that high, but I'm pretty sure we're close to 10 years. Maybe we are at 10 years. You're in the right place if you're looking for daily coverage of your team, the Cincinnati Bengals, who currently are embroiled in more contract drama. Today, we will dive back into what exactly is going on with Shemar Stewart as he leaves practice, leaves a facility before the final day of minicamp. Didn't miss a whole lot if he wasn't going to practice anyway, but the absence was certainly noted, picked up a lot of national steam. We'll talk about some of the narratives out there that are quite frankly ridiculous. We'll talk about what exactly is being negotiated between these two sides and why Shemar Stewart is not happy about it, why both sides can be seen as reasonable and why both sides can be seen as maybe not so reasonable. Those are all the things we're going to talk about with Shemar Stewart. We're also going to cover some of the last 2 days of minicamp where we haven't had a chance to talk about what's been happening on the field. We'll finish the show there, but James, you're down there for the final day of minicamp today on Thursday, and Shemar Stewart isn't there. And what was that like? Just the initial reaction. You learned about this as practice was going on.
Stole the show. It was the clear-cut number one topic throughout practice. And day 3 of minicamp is lighter. They had it in the stadium. It's a shorter practice. It's earlier in the morning, and it's really quick. It's in and out. And boy, oh boy, was it in and out, because I was like, man, I don't necessarily need to be here anymore, which is ironic since Shemar Stewart felt the same way. I mean, the moment you find that out, it's like, well, that's the story. Zach Taylor's talking after practice. Shemar Stewart isn't there. It's just during this process, and it's been public, and it's been oddly public. I'll say that. Like odd how much this has been covered. And again, it's because he hasn't been practicing. And so it becomes a topic, and then questions get asked and all of those things. But throughout it, you're like, well, he's there, he's in meetings, he's been the good soldier, all those things. Like he's engaged until today. And it's like, oh, well, he left after Wednesday's practice. And what I thought was interesting is he left after practice Wednesday, and it gets over mid-afternoon. And then Jordan Schultz tweeted a picture of him, and he's been working out at Black Sheep Performance for a few weeks now, the same place Joe Burrow works out at, and a bunch of other Bengals players work out at. But an NFL insider's tweeting a video of him on the bike. And it's like, oh, okay, so that's why that was tweeted. He's like, hey, see, I'm still working, but I'm not showing back up at minicamp. Like, I'm sure. And so didn't show up. Do I think he missed anything today? No, not at all. Everyone watching and listening could have made it through minicamp day 3 practice, I would say confidently, but especially tasked with what Shemar was going to be tasked with, which is standing there. But this is a distraction, and it's a big distraction, and it's going to be a big topic until he signs, until he's on the field, until we see 97 with a helmet on, or in practice uniform and working out. Until that happens, this is going to be something we discuss. It probably won't just be today, fortunately or unfortunately, however you want to look at it. And for us, I would say unfortunately, because I would much rather be talking about how he fits in on this football team. And we just haven't seen that yet. And I don't think anyone's thinking about that right now, because it feels like it's one simple thing, as we'll get into, but it feels like we're a long ways away from him getting on the field.
And as everyone, including him, that you would ask would admit, it would be far more ideal for him to have gotten work in over the Bengals offseason program.
Yep.
We didn't really emphasize this significantly during the one-day rookie minicamp that was very light work and acclimatization acclimation, whatever the term is, kind of session, getting them used to what they can expect from a schedule perspective, from a procedure perspective, from a this is how we're going to run practice perspective. But then when you miss all of the offseason program, all of the OTAs, the mandatory minicamp, because you're not under contract yet, you're sounding off, you leave early. This is as contentious as a first-round pick could handle negotiations with the team. And when I say first-round pick, I don't mean Shemar Stewart individually, the player. I mean his agent. I mean his camp. I also include him in that conversation because he has agency in this. But he's following the advice of those that he has entrusted to handle his contract, to handle his professional side of things, the non-football aspects of his life, right? And so he's doing what the plan is. All of this is, I assume, being coordinated with those advising him. And then when you dig into the actual dispute, it starts to feel, that's where I can really see both sides, let's say. And we'll dive into that. But where the Bengals have deservedly been under a ton of heat 2 years ago, last year, this year, for their various contract struggles with their receivers, with Jesse Bates, with Trey Hendrickson, you name it. They have been under fire from, the Pat McAfees of the world, the big name national reporters out there as well. We've been critical of the way they've done contracts. This is one where I really do see it in both perspectives here. When you dive into the specific topic at hand and the way that it became such an issue. The reason, like you said, the reason this is such an issue is because the agent side of things went through Pro Football Talk, and that's where this initially went very public. And then Shemar Stewart isn't practicing. Those are the two reasons that anyone is paying any attention to this. Amarius Mims, for all we know, and there are somewhat reputable accounts that Amarius Mims went through the same thing in his negotiation last year.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't say anything about it, and he practiced the whole time. So nobody thought about it. And what's different here is how contentious it's become, the call out of the organization, the front office, the non-participation. And because of all those things, it's very much in the spotlight, to the point that you have Adam Schefter going on the Pat McAfee show on Thursday and giving some misinformation or incorrect information that we'll correct here in a few minutes. But it's very easy to see why this has become such a hot button issue with the offseason that it has been for the receivers, for Trey Hendrickson, now for Shemar Stewart, and the Bengals' recent history. And that's why it's attracting all this attention.
A ton of attention. And I do think back to Amarius Mims last year, and there is a rookie camp right before minicamp, or right before training camp, excuse me. He got signed like the 22nd of July. That rookie session, and those sessions aren't open to the media. We don't know. Well, we don't know. Maybe he was like, all right, enough is enough. And then they went that route. I think it's interesting because the Bengals deserve plenty of criticism. And I've criticized them for the Shemar thing. And part of it is you just don't need the headache right now.
Mm-hmm.
Just don't. There's a lot going on. It would be really nice to have Shemar and working with Al Golden and working with Jerry Montgomery and working against some really good tackles and in all of those things, working on his one-on-ones and all these things that I was talking to different veterans about that the offensive line and defensive line has already done, to where guys like Dylan Fairchild are benefiting. Shemar would be benefiting from those reps against Orlando Brown Jr. and against Amarius Mims. So that part of it is frustrating. And the other thing here is the Bengals do have a point. It isn't just one-sided. A lot of people have asked us about it. And so let's dive into that, because it isn't just, oh my God, the Bengals are the devil. And they're not 100% right either. So we'll break it down coming up next. Today's show is brought to you by Game Time. Game Time is the app you need, because if you're going to go to Game 4 of the NBA Finals on Friday night, which I am so tempted to do, Well, you got to get the Game Time app. I use the Game Time app to go to the Eastern Conference Finals, Knicks Pacers. It was awesome. Found awesome seats. There really isn't a bad seat at the Field House in downtown Indianapolis, but Game Time is going to save you money. You download the Game Time app, and the best part about it is it's going to show you not only panoramic views from every seat in the house, but it's going to show you the best deals. So you could say, oh, well, this deal's really good, but it's up here. Do I want to go here? Do I want to move there? It just makes the ticket process so easy, whether it's Eastern Conference Finals like me or NBA Finals. Maybe you're looking for Cincinnati Reds, or to the future with the Cincinnati Bengals and maybe Shemar Stewart on the field. You got to take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDON NFL Locked On NFL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed.
A lot of people have been asking, James, you're right. What exactly is the issue? I've tried to explain this on the podcast before, but we'll walk through it here. The issue is around this language, which is the very high level of it, lawyer speak stuff, around when the player is in default of the contract, when the player has violated the contract. What does it mean to be in default of a contract? Well, every team defines it a little bit differently. And I don't know how exactly the Bengals are defining it in this case, but I do know that in the past, the Bengals have included things like imprisonment, the player voluntarily leaving the team, retirement, certain types of suspensions, and there are carve-outs for minor suspensions versus major suspensions, conduct detrimental suspensions. There are different kinds of suspensions, which is why I say certain suspensions. And honestly, there's carve-out for imprisonment too. If it's short-term, like less than a few days, that's not necessarily considered a default on the contract. Certain off-field injuries are part of this as well. And so what happens in current Bengals contracts is if you become in violation of your contract, if you're in default of your contract, you've done one of those severe misconduct or, retired or whatever it is, the guarantees in your contract for the year in which or the time in which you are in violation of your contract are no longer guaranteed. Those guarantees are voided. And there have been some points of confusion around that as well. I think voided guarantees don't void the contract. Shemar Stewart would still be eligible to earn all of the money on that contract, but the money just isn't guaranteed anymore. For example, Jamison Williams, and Andre Perota has pointed this out. Jamison Williams was suspended for gambling for 6 games with the Detroit Lions. The Detroit Lions voided the rest of his guarantees on his rookie deal because the Detroit Lions use the language that the Bengals are trying to put in here for Shemar Stewart. And I'll clarify that in a second. So Jamison Williams saw all of his rookie contract guarantees voided, but he still earned all that money. He still has the opportunity to earn that money. It's just not on a guaranteed basis anymore. That's all that means. So the difference
in the issue is Shemar Stewart's contract is guaranteed. Like that's a huge difference.
Yes.
Huge difference when you lose all of the guarantees.
Well, what's at risk here are future guarantees. So currently, the way the Bengals define things is they do not have a call out that says if you are in default or ever have been in default. The ever have been in default. If you have ever been in this situation where you have done something that is considered in default of your contract, then this guarantee voids. So Bengals don't have that language. A lot of teams do. Somewhere between 10 and 20-ish teams, depending on who you believe, use this language. Not too uncommon. According to reports, Walter Nolan, who signed his contract to pick 16, Gray Zabel, who signed his contract to pick 18, Seahawks and Cardinals, both of those teams have this language. That is, if you have ever been in default, this guarantee voids. Again, that money is still earnable, but that is the difference, is the if ever part of the clause that the Bengals are trying to put in. And I don't think this is the first time they've tried to put it in. I don't think they've managed to do it successfully before. And now you have this very public battle where we know exactly what's going on.
And so how everyone's going to hear that and say, oh, well, the Bengals are right. They're just trying to do something that's the rest of the league does. And on the flip side, and this is, by the way, real quick, I've seen this narrative. This has nothing to do with Jermaine Burton. Burton didn't have guarantees in his deal. It's a 3rd round pick. It's way different. It's apples to stakes. It's much, much different. So this isn't because Jermaine Burton scarred them or anything like that. But yeah, they want this in there because it protects them. It gives them another layer. And honestly, there's very few scenarios where Shemar Stewart doesn't play out his rookie deal. I mean, very, very few. Where he sees all that money, even if you think he's going to be a bust and stink and have 4.5 sacks in his entire career, doesn't matter. He's probably going to see the length of that rookie contract. Think about some of the rookies that have played out their rookie contract for the Bengals and not been hits pick-wise. But on the other side, if you're the Bengals and you want to break this precedent or create this precedent, where first rounders agree to this, sweeten it a little. I think that's what's interesting is if you look at some of these teams, and I don't know exact, but I guarantee you these teams like the Eagles or whoever that are going to get not just first rounders, but stars to agree to that type of language, that signing bonus that hits right away. You make it 80% instead of 50% right away. The moment you sign is deposited in your account, or 100%. Maybe you pay the entire signing bonus. The Bengals usually break it up into a couple payments. It doesn't have to be that way. And so they could literally get really specific where, like you said, a 1-game suspension for on-field stuff isn't going to set the contract into default. Like it could go
and
really
it
specific
based
there.
on language I've seen them use in the past.
And so like it isn't unreasonable for the Bengals to do it, but Shamar's like, well, Marius didn't have to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And Miles didn't have to do it. And so if you're the Bengals and you're asking him to do something that they didn't have to do, well, then maybe give Shemar something that you didn't give those guys, which is probably more of that signing bonus. Boom. Right away. The moment he puts that SS on the dotted line.
Yeah, it's just timing of that payout, right? Because if all the money is going to be paid, it's giving the money as early as possible. And the other thing I would say, to be fair to the Bengals here, is we don't know what concessions they have or have not made in terms of the timing of money. We don't know. We don't know if they heard Shemar Stewart's concerns with the injury waiver and then changed the language there. And then at that point, it was just too far gone where this other thing became this big issue. And then the injury waiver didn't matter anymore. That was the initial reported reason that Shemar Stewart wasn't practicing. And I understand why the Bengals would want to do this. I understand why Shemar Stewart wouldn't want to be the first player to agree to this. You can understand both sides. That's why it's a negotiation. I think this probably happens a lot. Mm-hmm. We just don't hear about it because the players just practice. This could happen with Demetrius Knight. We're still waiting to see what happens with second-round picks in 2025, as a couple of them are signed, but many of them are not, as the guaranteed money is getting into the second round now. And now you have teams fighting with agents over how much money will be guaranteed to second-round picks, as that will establish a precedent. Now the first 2 picks in the second round are getting fully guaranteed contracts. Now what happens after that? And as those contracts become guaranteed, now the default and voiding of future guarantees becomes more of an issue. Why is this suddenly an issue for the Bengals is another question that you might be asking. And how often do the Bengals guarantee future money, James?
Oh, if you're Joe Burrow or Jamar Chase, and maybe T. Higgins a little T.
And before Joe Burrow,
Carson?
Maybe? I would have to go look. Probably.
Carson. Yeah, I mean,
but I don't know for sure. I haven't looked at it specifically. Point is that the Bengals don't do future guarantees. So this idea of defaults affecting the future years of guarantees is not something that's come up for them in the past. Now that they're entering this world, and this is why they're doing it, they're entering this world late where they're going to have to guarantee money in future years of deals. And so they're trying to establish a precedent that says, hey, we're going to do more future guarantees, but we're also going to cover our butts. We're going to do a CYA clause, and that is going to involve these gross misconduct kind of things, or retirement, or whatever it is, that will cover us a little bit more in the case something goes really wrong. On the other side of it, if you're Shemar Stewart, I understand not wanting to give up, perceived leverage by practicing and wanting to hold that over the team's head, but you also really need to get on the field, man. And that's where it's tough for me to say. I think the players handling this 100% right. I don't think the team is handling it 100% right either. I can see both sides of this in really every way.
Yeah, let's hit that because I think there's more there. How Shemar's handled it, how his camp has handled it, how the Bengals are handling it. We heard from Zach Taylor on Thursday. So there's more here. I wasn't sure if there would be, but there's more here with all the contract breakdown as well. We'll do that coming up next. I was stunned the other day when Shemar talked like he did, and obviously our last show was on the Shemar stuff. And I'll say this, Jake, I know the organization didn't like it. I don't know how you could, but even in the moment, I'm like, oh my goodness. And then the more I digested it, the more I thought about it, the more I wonder if they just do not blink here. And even the suggestion I made of, oh, well, how about you give up the concession and give up a bit more signing bonus money? Maybe they just say, you know what? You're going to act like that and air this out and be super public and make it a thing. Fine. And I do wonder, because I do think they felt that. And that was heck, Zach talked about it on Thursday and was like, you could tell just by looking at his body language that it wasn't, they didn't love it. And so I do wonder there, but as far as Shemar and how he's handling it, what do you think? Because I think a lot of people are like, they make a face at best when it comes to him and what he said.
The Bengals have this history with players speaking negatively about the team that led to what is called the Carl Pickens clause, a loyalty clause the Bengals created and added to Pickens' contract, which I'm reading Wikipedia here, would cause him to forfeit all or some of his signing bonus if he insulted the organization in public. And this is now relatively common and was back in 2001. The Washington Post reporting on this back in January 2001. An arbitrator ruling on the Bengals side that said, yeah, you're allowed to do this in contract. So the Bengals are actually, as I understand it, more lenient with players speaking negatively about the organization than some other teams, where they will give you a written warning first. And then if you do it a second time, you are now in default of the contract. And so what's funny to me about this is that if Shemar Stewart had actually signed his contract before he said something like that, this would constitute a violation of one of those terms of the contract. So I think that it's good that he wasn't under contract when he said such a thing. And when you talk about the organization reacting and kind of hearing Zach Taylor, if you go back and listen to his remarks about them wanting to, I don't remember what word to use exactly, like protect. I don't think it was protect, but it's something like protect the locker room and the organization. You can understand where that's coming from when you consider their history. And this, again, is relatively commonplace, but I think that we can agree that that probably isn't the best way to handle it if you're Shemar Stewart. I think. And I understand he was being asked the same question repeatedly as more people join the media circle around him in the locker room. Maybe he's getting more frustrated as that conversation is happening, but that didn't help anything. To your point, could cause very well the Bengals to dig in more on this issue.
Yeah. So Zach, I pulled up the quote. He said, you were right. He said, protect. He said, I think there's education that happens with all the rookies that we do our best to educate them. Number one, we want to protect our team, our locker room. And so there's some things I understand when there's frustration there. And that's how he chose to do it. And that's his prerogative. And we look forward to getting him back in the fold. So it's like, yeah.
Starting to kind of couch his language there at the end and
right. Because he realized okay, let's go back. Yeah. Let's make this a non-story. But look, it is, and Shemar's handling it his way, and it's very public and fine. If that's it, if that's how his camp is choosing to do it, fine. We are in the content business. I'm not going to complain, but I'll put this out there. Jake, you ever hear me complain about David Locke or Locked On the podcast?
No, sir.
You ever hear me say Ross Jackson, that bump? Do you hear me say anything about any of the powers that be that are behind the scenes that Locked On Bengals people might not know, even though they're not behind the scenes. They're public on their pods, but you don't hear that. And so it's a bold strategy. It is not necessarily the strategy that we would take. You ever hear me talk bad about any boss? No. And even if you disagree, and even if you think it's the most asinine thing in the world, you kind of know, like, all right, well, even if I feel that way, I'm going to go tell you that and not the world that. So I do think that that's interesting. I'm not going to complain, but it's not necessarily that. If I was giving Shemar advice, I would say that, like, you don't want to add to the fire here, because it's already a fire, because you were this guy that everyone knows needs reps and you haven't gotten any, and you're not on the field, and you're not working with Jerry Montgomery, a guy that was brought in to help these young guys get better. And defense was the reason this team wasn't a legitimate Super Bowl contender last year. And they need you to do that. And so really, really tough to go there. And by the way, that's why Shemar would say, yeah, if you need me, then throw this out and get me on the field. And I get that logic. But past that, just pushing the conversation forward, he doesn't really have leverage. He's not going to go back into the draft next year. That is the stupidest thing. That is the stupidest thing. He has a guaranteed first round contract, 17th overall. He's going to pass that up to go back into the NFL draft next year. That would be, you want to talk about dumb decisions. That would be the dumbest decision. So I do not think that's even remotely plausible.
Yeah, I've seen that floated out there today as well. And it's asinine. Yeah, it's pretty ridiculous. The other thing that was out there today was what Adam Schefter said on Pat McAfee. Said that it isn't a normal clause. It's not normal for the Bengals. We've talked about why it's not normal for the Bengals. They've never had to worry about future guarantees before. It is normal for many, many teams in the NFL. Like I said, 10 to 20, don't know the exact number, teams in the NFL use this language that is default or ever been in default. If you're in default, or if you ever have been in default, this guarantee voids. And they have it split out for every different guarantee in the contract. They'll have it for 2025, 2026, 2027. It'll be different for each year. Maybe they'll say, we're not going to void 2028 if you do it in 2026. And that's where the Bengals can be creative. They can have carve-outs. They can try to do different things to try to protect themselves while maybe easing the precedent in. I don't know if there's any compromise to be had here at this point, the way both sides have dug in. So that is what I think is tricky about this. But yeah, I mean, the idea that you're going to re-enter the draft and that's your leverage is not something I'm really willing to entertain at this point.
That's not leverage. That's like I don't even want to go down the path, but think about it. I'll just guaranteed contract. He has one offered to him today. He doesn't like 5 words in it. So he's going to go back in the draft next year at risk not getting a guaranteed contract. Who knows when he goes? Teams would certainly be leery of taking him. You already were 17th. Like, come on. So the compromise should happen. It needs to get done. He needs to be on the field. I'm saying this June 12th. If he is not on the field for day 1 of training camp, when we're out there, then both sides deserve all the blame in the world. Because at some point you should be able to come together and get this done. Because everyone should want 97 on the field. And so if 97 isn't on the field for day 1 of training camp, ready to go, it's a failure. And
I think it could probably be construed at this point. We're quite late in the show that we've talked a lot about why the Bengals are being reasonable about this. But like I said, I can also totally understand Shemar Stewart's perspective here, even if I don't think he's handled it as well as you could possibly handle it. I again think he's acting on the advice of an agent who represents Dalvin Cook and James Cook and represented Darrelle Revis. Doesn't have a lot of experience with the Bengals. Doesn't have any experience with the Bengals, actually, as far as I know. I think I looked through this list and didn't see any Bengals players on the list before. Not a lot of big contracts generally in this agent's history. And so while he took exception and advised his client not to participate in any of the practice activities this offseason, every other team saw their first round pick that was healthy participate. And so that is unusual in the first place. Everything about this has been kind of unusual from the player side. And on the Bengals side, they're trying to change something. and that can be hard. And when it goes public like this, it's going to be scrutinized, especially when you have the history you have. And ideally, you would figure something out by now. Certainly by the time training camp starts, but ideally, this would not have been something we would have had to have talked about for the last few weeks. And Shemar Stewart would be getting the reps. And so we're far from ideal at this point.
Far past ideal. We've been maybe you don't think we've been critical in this episode in general. We've been very critical of the Bengals during this process, because what I come back to is you just don't need another headache. You just need them on the field. Like is this the year where you create,
one thing
where you create the and that's it. Like that's what so that I totally see Shemar's side. We've done honestly hours at the time by this juncture on that side of it. But now that we have more information, now that we have a clear-cut idea of what's going on, we've heard from Shemar. Now he leaves. It's got to get done. So hammer it now, write it in stone. It's Thursday evening. It better be resolved by day one of training camp. We better see 97 Shemar Stewart on the field practicing, not in a ball cap, not putting on some sunscreen because it's going to be really hot in July and everyone's got to have some sunscreen on. No. Need Shemar Stewart on the field practicing. Doesn't mean you can't wear sunscreen, Shemar, but you got to be out there participating.
It's 10 in the morning.
Oh, that's right.
Training camp schedule.
Yes, I forgot it. It'll be a little better. Yeah, baby.
So much better. Oh, yeah.
You know who? Nothing is better than sunscreen Jake. I have a picture of Jake before the Super Bowl media availability at UCLA, and he's rubbing lotion on his nose. He was so worried about the sun. Anyways, I don't know how we got on this topic. But
I don't either. You really ran with that. So we didn't get to a mini camp observations.
Nah, we can another day.
Sun protection is important. I think we can all agree there. We didn't get to our mini camp observations. Didn't get to Ted Karras' thoughts. He described this as not a distraction. Ted Karras, the Bengals NFLPA executive on the team, obviously going to support the players here. Obviously, also would think and has said, I think, that it would be great if Shemar was on the field, but sometimes this is the way it goes, and you got to do business. So the good news is that this can't be a distraction for 4 weeks, because the Bengals are not in the building for at least 4 weeks, 5 weeks, I guess, until late July. We got the training camp schedule now. We haven't talked about that. Haven't talked about Jermaine Pratt landing with the Raiders and the Bengals' inability to get a trade done with Jermaine Pratt, the money he made from the Raiders, whether or not the money was just a non-starter. So there are topics here, and some Joe Burrow stuff, some Dan Pitcher stuff on continuity. Dan Pitcher revisiting the Joe Burrow continuity topic. Some other Joe Burrow comments that we didn't get to. So there will be plenty to talk about here this offseason as the Bengals have adjourned their offseason program, and we'll continue to remain on watch for a deal to get done for 2 different Bengals edge rushers. Until next time, that's going to do it for this episode of the Locked On Bengals podcast. Thanks for listening. Hoo day, and have a good one.